Okay, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to take what we've done already and we're going to animate it slightly. So eventually what we want to happen is that for every key I press, we get a circle in a random location with a color, and that color animates slightly. And we also get the size animation. So I don't know if you can pick up on the color changing, but it's pretty slight. We're just adding a little bit to the hue. But either one of those will do for us to start. We're going to start actually by just changing the color of these circles. And we're actually going to start simpler by just changing the color of one circle. So not all of them, that will come later. So if we go to Paper.js, we go back to tutorials, and you look at animation at the bottom. First thing that you can do is take a look at some of the examples. So here's an example, and you can see it's really simple actually to do the animation. What we do is we define something, in this case a rectangle, in our case it will be a circle, and then there's this on frame, and whatever code we put in here will run on every frame of the animation. So in this case, every frame of this animation, we're rotating that rectangle 3 degrees. Or in this case, which is what we're going to use, every frame we're adding 1 to the hue of this circle that we defined up here. So let's try this out. Let's go ahead and make a new circle, not inside the key down, so this will just always be there when the page loads. So we'll call it var animate circle equals new path dot circle, and we'll have it be new point, and let's make this circle at 300, 300. And the radius, let's make it larger, 100, just like that. And then we'll do animated, and let's call it animated circle rather than animate dot fill color, and let's set it to be red to start, just like that. Great. So it's not going to be animated yet, but if we refresh, we get one big circle, and then every time I hit a key, we get smaller circles that are random. Now we need to add in our animation. And it's really simple, as we saw, function on frame, and we can pass in or accept this event argument if we wanted to do something with each frame, if we wanted some data about it. We don't actually need that. And then all we'll do in here is do animated circle dot fill color dot hue plus equals 1. And this is straight from that example. So every time animation requests a new frame, which isn't up to us, so we're not deciding the frame rate, how often this code is called. Just anytime there's a new frame, which Paper.js takes care of, we're adding 1 to the hue of our animated circle. Let's refresh, and there we go. So really simple to do that sort of an animation. We can also do animations though where we're changing position of something, and that is a little bit more complicated. This one happens to be even more complex, this example, because they're not just animated something from one point to another point, and it's also not accelerating evenly. So it's a little more complex, but it's still only a few lines. Here's another example of moving things. Some other animations. What we're going to do though is use something they don't show on the examples here that I spent a little bit of time digging into the docs. What we want to do is just scale each one down every frame. So what we do is basically when I press a key, we make a circle that, let's say it starts out as 300 by 300, or 300 radius, excuse me. When I hit that character, every frame we're shrinking it a little bit by basically scaling it by 0.99 or 0.98, I forget the exact number, but we're multiplying it by a smaller size every frame, and it just shrinks and shrinks until it disappears. So I'll show you how that works. Let's go back to our code. We have this circle still animating, and inside of on frame, rather than just adding 1 to the hue, what we'll do is do animated circle dot scale, which is a method that I found, and we can multiply it by any fraction that we want. If we just leave it at 1, it will stay the same size, so we won't actually see it. But if we do something like 0.9 and we refresh, there we go. Every frame changes hue by 1, and it scales by 0.9 or 90% of what it was in the previous frame. So if we change that to something like 0.99, it's going to be a slower transition down. And if we change it to something like 0.5, it's going to shrink very, very quickly. So every frame it gets half as big as it was in the previous frame. So I think what I went with was 0.9 to start. So we'll leave it at that. And now we have a single circle changing color and shrinking. What we want to do next is when I hit these other keys, we want those circles to do the same thing. And that's a little bit more complicated, but honestly, the code here, it will stay the same. All that's different is that we need to do this for every circle that's on the page. And this is probably the most drastic change that we'll make. What we'll actually do is have an array of circles. And every time we press a key, we'll add that circle in to that new array. Because right now, we're not actually keeping track of all these circles. We need to save all of them somehow so that on frame right here in this function, we can then refer back to every circle that already exists and animate it. So we'll keep this code, but what we'll want to do is loop through an array that doesn't exist. So we'll just call it circles. So for var I equals 0, I is less than circles.length, I++. What we'll want to do is do circles I dot fill color dot hue. So we'll just start with the fill color just at the very beginning. So I'll just copy this line. So it's not going to work yet because circles doesn't exist. But the idea is that on every frame, we loop through all circles in this array, and we add one to each one's hue every frame. And you might think that that's pretty intense, and it is. It's a lot of stuff happening, but Paper.js takes care of it. But we'll also be adding in a small optimization towards the end. So I'll show you what I mean in a future video. But for now, this is what we'll do. And all we have to do now is actually add this circle that we're making into the circles array. So we can define that array, var circles is an empty array to start. And then when you press a key, on key down, we'll just do circles.push this new circle. Circles.push this new path.circle at this random point. Right now we have radius of 10, and we're setting the fill color as orange. So we're just pushing that circle that we already had into this circles array. And then we're updating every circle. So there might be one circle, there might be 20 circles, there might be 100 circles at any given time. We loop through all of them and add one to each hue. And if we take a look right now and I refresh, it doesn't quite work yet. And this brings up a really interesting point about how push works. So if I open the console, it tells me cannot read property hue of undefined on line 24, which is right here. So it's not, somehow it's not reading that hue property of fill color. It's saying fill color doesn't exist. So let's do a console.log circles I, and you'll see what the problem is. If I open this up, it stopped because we hit an error, but we actually added orange, the string, into the array, not the actual new circle. And that's because what we're pushing in is not just a new circle, we're making the new circle and then we're setting the fill color to be orange. So the last thing that was returned was the string orange. So the end result is that we're just pushing in orange every time, which is not what we want. So we'll make a new variable. We'll call it var new circle. And then we'll do new circle.fill color separately equals orange. And then we'll push in new circle. So rather than editing this out, I do think it's an important error to see. Totally caught me off guard for a moment there, but it's important to understand how that works, where we have those chained methods on top of one another, where we had path.circle and then .fill color equals orange. When we just added that whole thing into the array with push, we were just adding orange in. So we need to fix that. So hopefully this does it, and actually I know it does, but if we refresh and take a look, now I add in new circles, randomly placed, and they all animate. The hue animates at least. Perfect. Now let's update this to work with size. So it's actually just this exact same line that we have here. I'll get rid of our console.log, except we want circles I. Okay, so before I show you if it works, let's just review what we did. So when you hit any key, we add in a circle at a random point. So we make a random point, we make a new circle with that random point, 10 pixel radius, and let's actually change that to match what we have in the solution, which is 500. And then we're setting the fill color to start as orange, which will change eventually. And then we push that into an array called circles. Then, every time a new frame is called, every animation frame, we're looping through all circles. And for each one, we're adding 1 to the hue, and we're multiplying the size of the scale by 0.9. So we're shrinking it just by a tiny bit every frame. But there's so many frames that it actually shrinks pretty quickly. And we can get rid of our animated circle now that starts on page load. We'll just start with a black screen, and then when you hit a key, we add a circle. So let's try it. There we go. So this is almost exactly the same as what we have here, minus the sound. One big difference is the color. So every key has an assigned color here. So Q is this blue, P is a darker blue, F is a gray, R, so on. R is a purple. Right now here, we're setting everyone to start as orange and then changing the hue. So we will need to fix that, but I'm gonna wait to do that until we add in sound. So we're done for now. There is a small optimization that we'll make at the end, because right now, we're never removing those circles from the circle array. So even if, after 10 seconds, that circle is gone, even after 3 seconds, we don't see it. Technically, it's still in that array. So that's not ideal. If we had 10,000 circles that we had created and we don't see any of them, we don't want to be looping over all of them. So in the last video, I'll show you how we can remove a circle when we know that it's gone, or when we know that it's no longer visible. Okay, so next up, we'll work with sound.